Hi, this is Jeff Haas with Perpetual Motion Studios. Today we're going to take a look at some of the visual effects I use in my films. In particular, A Cog in the Machine. It's a short animated cartoon about a robot working a boring factory job. And in one sequence, the robot is assigned to sweep up the factory floor. So he's given a broom and off he goes. So the robot and the broom are typical keyframe animation, as I've covered in other videos. But the dust effect is a simulation. And in Lightwave, that starts off with using their particle system. Their particle system allows you to create simulations for smoke, dust, water, and then you can assign different looks to the particles. So here I've got the yellow box around the end of the broom. That is your particle emitter. And on this panel, I've set up a birth rate of 2,000 particles per second, and the effect is based on a keyframe. So every time the broom made contact with the ground, I would set a keyframe, and that would generate particles, the particles representing the dust. And on the different parameters on the particle emitter, I can set the lifetime of the particles because you generate dust, and then I wanted it to slowly fade away. So I've got a lifetime of 24 frames plus or minus 3 frames, so the dust doesn't all dissipate and disappear at the same time. It's somewhat randomized. Now, when the dust initially is created, there's a bit of an explosive force. So the dust tends to be very active and jump upward. So there's an upward velocity setting, and then it would gently settle back down based on the gravity settings. It's a little overwhelming. There's a lot of panels here, and at first there's quite a bit to take in. But all these panels are basically instructing how the particles will behave over time. And again, that is something I don't have to manually animate. I set up a series of parameters dictating what frames the effects begin and end, and then the software, Lightwave, will then generate the dust for me. So at this point, we're only halfway done because we're simply generating a lot of single particles. Well, that doesn't look like dust. So that's where you come in and use the hypervoxel settings, and that's where we can take these particles that are generated by the simulation and make them look like something. So here we've got particle sizes that I can set, and most importantly, as the robot is flying in and out of different colored spotlights on the floor, I wanted the dust generated to reflect the color of the spotlight. There's 4 hits of the broom on the floor, and the particles will render in green, blue, red, and yellow depending on what spotlight he's in. And that's where you can see the luminosity settings, the light settings for the hypervoxels. And then the final piece of this puzzle is to add a texture to the particles. In this case, I'm using a fractal noise texture, and I've got scale the size of each piece as it is assigned to the particle. So all these parameters together will cause the particles to look like dust or smoke or whatever, what have you, when you do the final rendered animation. And it looks something like this. And you can see as the animation progresses, the dust color changes from green, blue, red, and finally to yellow. Now in the next sequence, I have a variation of what we just did. But seeing as this animated short has no dialogue and the story is told strictly through the visuals and the music track, during this sequence, it's kind of a happy, upbeat music track as the robot is using his imagination to try to make the most of this boring broom-pushing job. So I kind of envisioned a Gene Kelly abstracted little sequence here where as he's pushing the broom, instead of dust coming up off the floor, it would take the form of musical notes. And in order to do that, again, going to Lightwave's hypervoxel system, I've substituted the settings that we had previously used to generate dust to make these things look like musical notes. So in order to accomplish this, I had to substitute the settings we just set up for the dust and change it to musical notes. So I'm using a graphic image representation of musical notes that you can see here. And on the hypervoxel panel, we're substituting that set of parameters to override the hypertexture we'd set up. As in the first sequence, that the musical notes will change color from green to blue to red to yellow depending on what spotlight they are being generated through. And by doing this, it gave a little touch of whimsy to the animation. Now in the final sequence I'm going to cover today. The little robot was nervously backing up, and he bumps into a robot. These are the robots that are being assembled in this factory. And by him bumping into the robot, it forces them to fall down like a series of dominoes. And the act of all these robots falling down was not something I wanted to animate by hand, but by using Lightwave's bullet system, I was able to set up parameters so that once the first robot starts to fall, the simulation takes over and generates all the robots in a row to fall down by themselves. All the robots, as you can see here, have a rigid property assigned to them, and you'll see there's a collision object listed. Well, that's an invisible collider that I placed right on top of our little floating robot. So as he backs up, that invisible collider bumps the first robot, causing the animation and the simulation to begin, and they all topple over like dominoes. And the other panel setting here is I've got a gravity setting of -9.8, and in the software, -9.8 on gravity represents roughly the gravity that we have here on planet Earth. So that gives you a realistic gravity setting for these robots to topple over and collide. So by doing this, I'm marrying keyframe animation of our little floating robot friend to the simulated bullet dynamics of the falling, toppling robots, and you can see the final result looks like this. You can check it out on my website. There's a link in the description. You can check out the cartoon if you're interested. That's pretty much all we have for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.